All right, guys, here we go with the American Revolution. The war is about to break. We're just going to kind of rewind a little bit. First Continental Congress met September 1774. All colonies except for Georgia went. Why not Georgia? A couple of reasons, which we talked about before. It's far. A lot of Georgia was military and former convicts, so some of them just may not have been interested. But they voted to stop trade with England and asked each colony to form a militia. And a militia is, as you should remember, a fighting force, a volunteer army. All right. Now, back in Boston, remember coercive acts? General Thomas Gage was placed in command of the colony in Massachusetts. Now, he learned through his own group of spies and informants that the colonists are storing weapons in Concord, Massachusetts, just about 20, 30 miles away. So he has a bunch of British troops, a bunch of officers, go and confiscate this. The Sons of Liberty learn about this and send messengers like Paul Revere and William Dawes that the regulars or the redcoats are coming to Lexington and Concord to, collect the weapons. So this is known as the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. In reality, there were over 40 people riding that night, not just Paul Revere and William Dawes. They just started it. In Lexington, they meet up with a man named Dr. Samuel Prescott. They move on to Concord, but they don't make it, or at least Paul Revere and William Dawes don't make it. Revere is captured, actually. Dawes is thrown from his horse, breaks his arm, and Prescott is the only one to make it on to Concord. All right. This is an image of Paul Revere. This is his actual grave in the Granary Burial Ground. Nothing to worry about, just wanted to share it with you. But this sets up the start of the American Revolution, the shot heard around the world. It happened on the Lexington Green, April 19th, 1775, at about 7 a.m., dawn, essentially. No one knows who fired that first shot. We know that it was not a British soldier. We know that it was not an American colonist. It was someone off in the distance. Maybe it was someone out hunting for their food for the day, or maybe it was someone who was trying to entice a fight. We don't know. But this was the start of the American Revolution. That day, that was the first blood shed. 7 to 9 colonists were shot and killed that day at Lexington. And at this point, people had to make a choice. Were they going to be loyal to the king, be a loyalist, or were they going to become a patriot and fight for the freedom, fight for the advancement of America to become an independent country? All right, you see here's the city of Boston. Now, Revere followed this road right here, this route. First, he rode across the Charles River, and then rode all the way to Lexington. William Dawes rode out over the Neck, which is that narrow strip of land right here, and he rode out through Roxbury and rode up this way. Now, when we say the British advanced by sea, it was 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. What that means is the British went by boat from Boston, went down the Charles River to Cambridge, and that is where they started their march onto Lexington and Concord. All right, and they're pretty much following William Dawes' route. All right, and here's Lexington, here's Concord. It was somewhere in the middle where Revere was captured. At this point, a lot of people didn't fully follow or want independence. Okay, but doesn't mean that fighting wasn't happening. May 10th, 1775, Ethan Allen and a man named Benedict Arnold, who you'll hear about it later, seized Fort Ticonderoga in northern New York. On the same day, it was May 10th, that the Second Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia. And they vote to form a Continental Army. George Washington is chosen as the commanding general, and he is chosen because the Massachusetts militia, which made up this foundation of the Continental Army, lost their general. Dr. Joseph Warren was shot in the head, bayoneted, and the British did this in an attempt to disrespect him, disrespect the colonists. This was personal. It was ugly what they did to the body of Dr. Warren. And things got nasty. Here we have General Washington and Ethan Allen, leader of the Green Mountain Boys. Like I said, people were not fully committed to liberty yet. The men and women of Boston, especially, but yes, Massachusetts as well, were very into it. But getting the other 13 colonies fully involved was going to take time. A man named Patrick Henry helped push it along. He was a Virginian, and he gave a very forceful speech in where he is coined or credited with giving the terms, "Give me liberty or give me death." This is one of the key leaders, one of our founding fathers that really helped push us towards independence. Now, I talked before about Washington gaining command, and it was because of this Battle of Bunker Hill, that George Washington is given command. Because in this battle, the Americans did really well. They only lost, I think it was 400 colonists, whereas the British, they won the battle. They took the hill, but they lost over 1,000 soldiers that day to our 400. The only difference is they had a whole lot more in reserve than we did. But even General Gage acknowledged that the loss that they took that day is more than they can bear. If they keep losing soldiers at that rate, he recognized that they were going to lose that war. Just to give an idea, again, here's Boston. This is where the Old North Church is. Over here, Charlestown. This is Breeds Hill and Bunker Hill. This is where the two Massachusetts militia groups set up after Lexington and Concord to try to push the British out of Boston. They would succeed eventually when George Washington and General Henry Knox come in and take over, and they will eventually be able to push the British out of Boston, but it would take General Washington and General Knox to do so. Some members of Congress still were holding out hope for peace, one of them being John Adams. On July 5th, 1775, almost a year before the Declaration of Independence, they sent one last petition to the king called the Olive Branch Petition, asking just to please, can we restore peace? Can we restore happiness here? Can we try to work this out? The king never even acknowledged it. It went to him. He got it, but he just pretty much crumpled it up, threw it in the trash, threw it in the fire. At this same time, February 1776, a man named Thomas Paine starts publishing pamphlets and writing, The Summer Soldier, Common Sense. And in this, he argues for liberty, argues against monarchies, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Monarchies, by design, are corrupt. He sells over 100,000 copies throughout the colonies. Common Sense pretty much becomes the second most circulated book through all of America, second only to the Bible. This caused more and more colonists to push for independence. And a declaration is made. A man named Henry Lee from Virginia proposes a resolution of free and independent states on June 7th. They take about the Congress debates. People are fighting and arguing over, should we push for independence? Should we try to restore our relationship with Britain, with England? Time is taken off. Thomas Jefferson, along with Ben Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, come together to draft a formal declaration, a formal resolution to send to the king declaring our independence. And the Declaration of Independence is what came of it. On July 2nd, Congress meets. They approve the resolution to declare independence. 2 days later, they sign the document. They sign on the dotted line. John Hancock, as you see up here, the president of the Continental Congress at the time, is the first to sign, signs it nice and big and large, bigger than everyone else, because he wanted to kind of rub it in the king's face, say, hey, I guess you can read that without your glasses. And at this point, the number of patriots in the country rises. A lot more people want independence from England. They're done with the king. About 40% were patriots. But at the same time, there are also another 40% that were kind of like, nah, I just want to kind of stay out of it. They were kind of neutral, weren't patriots, weren't loyalists. They just wanted to keep to themselves, do their own thing. But there was still that 20 to 30% of loyalists that still wanted to stay loyal to the king. And those were predominantly the wealthy farmers, the men that had money, had substance. Washington's leading his army, but he is getting his tail whooped. They're mostly volunteers from Massachusetts, untrained, undisciplined. They only had to enlist for 1 year, and he never had more than 17,000 soldiers at any one time, and that was a maximum. I mean, he had much less throughout the rest of his time. And to make matters worse, not only were we fighting the British, but the British brought in a whole force of mercenaries called the Hessians. So not only were us, the Americans, lacking food, clothing, weapons, guns, ammunition, now we're fighting against another whole fighting force, the German Hessians. Washington very quickly was pushed out of New York City. He fled into Pennsylvania, by Philadelphia, where he kind of regrouped and tried to figure out his next strategy. And it comes on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1776. He crosses the Delaware at night. He receives word that the Hessians are camped out in Trenton, New Jersey, and, well, they are drunk from Christmas. So they cross the river. This is one of the most famous portraits of George Washington of the American Revolution. It is George Washington crossing the Delaware, crosses into New Jersey, attacks the Hessians before dawn, surprises most of them in bed, captures or kills over 400 of them. And this was like a huge victory, huge morale boost for the Americans. They continue to go on, winning battles, losing battles, winning battles, back and forth. The British now have a strategy to end this war once and for all. And that was to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. Now, to do that, they need to seize the Hudson River, which is here in New York. This is the Hudson River right here. So they had General John Burgoyne coming down from the north, from Canada. They had General Howe coming up from New York, from southern New York, and Lieutenant Colonel St. Leger coming from the west, coming from Lake Ontario along the Mohawk River. They were to meet here in Albany, New York, to rendezvous and shut down that whole corridor. They figured that if they could cut off the head of the serpent, they can isolate New England, the war would fizzle out. Washington was able to outsmart them, though. He let a rumor go that he was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when indeed he had moved his army to Connecticut over here. So General Howe leaves New York, does not follow the plan, and goes to get Washington over here, and he's not there. He's gone. He left. St. Leger is scared off by rumors of a large military force heading towards them when he only had a small detachment of soldiers. That, again, was a rumor spread out by Benedict Arnold, one of Washington's most trusted generals. Arnold finds out Leger's turned away, so he turns and returns back to Albany, where he meets up with General Horatio Gates, one of the commanding generals, and together they stand up against General Burgoyne and defeat him soundly at the Battle of Saratoga. Saratoga was a turning point. This was the turning point of the American Revolution. Because not only did we gain another victory, a huge victory, but also Europeans started to notice, specifically the French. And I'll get to that in a minute. But Arnold is injured in the battle. He's actually shot in the leg. This is an image of the surrender at Saratoga. We know it's a false one. Here we have General Burgoyne, we have General Horatio Gates, and this right here is supposed to be General Benedict Arnold. But we know he was shot in the leg. There's no way he would have been standing there after being shot in the leg. So this was an interpretation portrait, not a factual portrait. Again, Saratoga is the turning point of the American Revolution, one of the most pivotal and important battles of this war. European countries start to realize and recognize we could win this. We could beat England. Especially France notices this. France has a huge interest in this, being that England is their worst enemy. They hate each other. But let's get back to Arnold. He's injured. He's shot in the leg, and while he is recovering, he meets a woman by the name of Peggy Shippen, who is a loyalist. And she starts talking to him, and they start going back and forth, and he starts feeling resentment over him not having a higher position, a higher rank in the American army, and which leads him down a dark path of resentment and eventually treason, where he tries to turn over the plans for West Point, America's greatest fortress on the Hudson River in New York. He attempts to turn it over to the British, but he is caught, but he escapes. But he is forever branded as a traitor to America. We start to get help from other countries. Ben Franklin goes to France, asks for help. France agrees. And with Franklin is a man named Marquis de Lafayette, who was a young soldier, very little to no military experience, but he is brilliant. France also convinces Spain to jump in because, well, nobody liked England at the time. Valley Forge is where George Washington and his army spent the winter of 1777 to 1778. This was another pivotal moment for the American army. This was survival. Many of them were sick with smallpox, because smallpox was now coming back. Most Americans had lost their immunities to it, and it was coming back with a fury. They had little to no jackets or shoes, little to no food. Some of them were reduced to chewing on leather and tree bark just to survive. In comes a man by the name of Baron Friedrich von Steuben. He was a Prussian soldier. He comes in and he teaches American soldiers how to drill, how to train. Specifically, he teaches them how to use the bayonet. And this is going to become one of the most important tools that the Americans have, especially going up to the Battle of Yorktown. But we also change our tactics. We change the way we fight. And one of the biggest changes is guerrilla warfare in the South. All right, this is predominantly in the South. It was much more open area, and we used the Southern fighters to run this. One of the most famous ones was a man named Francis Marion, nicknamed Swamp Fox. He only had a small group of about 20 guys. They were all mounted on horseback. They carried minimum supplies, and they just did hit-and-run attacks. They would jump out of the swamps, attack the British, cut them down, and disappear back into the swamps without almost leaving a trace other than dead British soldiers in their wake. They inflicted mass casualty, minimum time. And this goes on, throughout the South, completely tiring out and frustrating the Southern Army. They head up into Yorktown, Virginia. And that is where we realize we have them cornered. Because at this point also, the French have arrived. Specifically, the French Navy, led by General Rochambeau, who was the French general in charge. Between the Marquis de Lafayette, George Washington, and Alexander Hamilton, the leadership that they had within the American troops and the French soldiers in the Chesapeake Bay, we sandwich and cut off General Cornwallis at Yorktown. He's in trouble. British troops and resupplies cannot get through the French barricade, and we have Yorktown completely isolated. All right, over here you see where we are, where we're talking about. This is along the James River. I'm sorry, not the James River. I was wrong. But it is along here. The French are out here in Chesapeake Bay, and they are sailing in, cannons firing on the British fort, sailing back out. You see here is Yorktown right here. American troops are set up over here at Gloucester Point, and they completely surround the British. This is also one of the places where Alexander Hamilton, you guys probably heard of him from the play, but this is where he really shines is in this battle. It was partially because of his tactics that they were able to surround and siege the British, taking their own cannons and using them against them. This is known as the end of the American Revolution, the Battle of Yorktown. This is it. After this, Cornwallis surrenders, and we've won the war. But why? There are 4 key reasons why we won this war. For one, we had better leadership. Was George Washington an amazing military genius? No. He was an amazing leader. He had other people that helped him that were brilliant military strategists, like Lafayette, Horatio Gates, Nathaniel Greene, Alexander Hamilton, von Steuben. These were the guys, these were the military tacticians that helped George Washington win. His leadership, their brilliance was a perfect combination. The help from France, soldiers, money, guns, support from Spain in terms of money. We knew the land. This was our backyard, so we knew how to get from place to place, shortcuts, which is why the guerrilla warfare in the South was able to work, as well as our hit-and-run tactics in the North. And motivation. We were fighting for our freedom. We were fighting for our independence, for our lives. The British soldiers, they were fighting here for a paycheck. They were following orders. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ends the American Revolution. 6 conditions existed. First and foremost, number 1, we were now a free and independent country. Our boundaries were established as the Mississippi River on the west, Canada, and Florida. We gave up Florida. We gave it away. Why? Because Florida was mostly loyalists anyway, and we wanted to give it back to Spain just to kind of rub it in England's face even more so. We weren't colonized in Florida, so it really didn't bother us any. We viewed ourselves as friends with the Spanish, so we said, hey, give it back to them. We wanted the right to fish off a Canadian coast because some of the best fishing in the American waters is in the northern waters off Canada. And we both agreed that we would repay debts. And we agreed that we would return enslaved people that survived, any prisoners of war. And the final one is that Congress would recommend, quote unquote, that the states return property seized from loyalists. And that really didn't happen. Most loyalists left. They went to Canada, which was still British controlled, or they went back to England. Most loyalists did not stay around. Now, this is a portrait of the peace treaty negotiations. Our 3 key negotiators were Ben Franklin, John Adams, and a man named John Jay. We'll see him again later in a few weeks. Now, the British representatives over here, well, they may look like full people, but the British ambassadors refused to sit for the portrait. The original portrait was half finished. The Americans, they stood, they sat, they waited, whereas the British, no, they did not stay for the negotiations. They were kind of embarrassed. This was the world power getting beat by a bunch of rebels, a bunch of farmers, and they were embarrassed by it. But after all, war has a cost, and it's not always financial. It's not always money. We lost over 25,000 soldiers. 25,700 men died in this war. Another 1,400 missing in action. And what that probably meant was they died in a prison camp or they died in the battlefield, and we never found them. 10,000 British troops were killed. 60 to 100,000 loyalists lost their land and property, partially because we burned it and took it for supplies. And we were in debt. War cost money to the tune of about $27 million. That's a lot of money, which is going to give our country a couple of problems in the next couple of years, but we will find a solution for it. We'll talk about that in about a week or so. But what was the greatest cost of war? Soldiers. Men, sons, brothers, dying for this country, laying down their lives. But it brings us to a new start, a new government. We move away from monarchy, from kings and queens, and we set up a government called the Articles of Confederation. It becomes the new law of the land for the next 8 years. And it worked, well, okay. It had its issues. It had its bright points, its strengths, but it definitely had its weaknesses. But it was a Republican. It was a republic government. We the people. All right. We vote for people. They represent us in government, and they make decisions for us. Vermont and New Jersey step up, and they outlaw slavery. They become the first two states in America to outlaw slavery straight away after the American Revolution. Massachusetts is not far behind. A woman, named Elizabeth Freeman sues for her freedom, and she wins. And at that point, Massachusetts goes, you know what? This isn't worth it. Set them free. We fought for freedom. Give them their freedom. Massachusetts had a huge change in their thinking after this revolution, being that they were the powder keg, the spark, the heart of this revolution. Now, like I said, the Articles of Confederation will be in place for about 8 years. It had its strengths, it had its weaknesses, but ultimately it will set the stage for a new government, the Constitution of the United States, we the people. All right, guys, that's it. We will talk more about the rest of this later, and make sure you answer all the questions.